Okay, so the time is 5 past, and we'll just go ahead and get started. I've started the recording actually, so don't worry about getting the. We'll send out probably the slide deck and the recording just after this meeting to everybody that's a part of the session. A few just practical notes. There's around 20 companies registered for this call. So we're using something called WebEx events. So that means that everybody is by default muted unless you're a panelist. So ask potential questions in the Q&A chat box, and that can be located to the right there. And one of my colleagues will help me with potential questions that come in. Just before we jump any further, can you hear me okay, Mo?
Yes, perfectly fine.
Yeah, excellent. So this meeting we'll try to keep fairly short and to the point. We'll try to make it maximum 45 to 60 minutes. And as I mentioned, we'll send out all the material, also post short webinar as well for those of you who are interested in knowing more. The agenda is just a very quick introduction to Whitson as a company, the problem statement, going through what we're actually wanting to try to solve. Also touch a base on a field-wide equation of state, which is one of the key, call it project deliverables. What is it really? And we go into the Duvernay specifics, which is essentially a part of this multi-client study. You look at how can we actually use this in practice, which is also going to be a nice session before there will be a couple of final remarks. So very quick on Whitson. So we've been around for more than 30 years and been focusing on helping the global oil and gas industry, everybody from independents to super majors and NOCs, with essentially PVT related engineering. So that's consulting, software, and databases, which is a little bit relevant for what we're going to talk about today. And when we talk about PVT-related engineering, it's essentially everything that has to do with PVT. That can be PVT model development, laboratory follow-up, and whatnot, gas-enhanced oil recovery, gas condensate reservoirs, well performance, and advanced allocation, and everything in between there. And we typically say that everything we work with at least has a significant component or a significant compositional sensitive component to it. When it comes to tight unconventionals specifically, we've been working on most of the largest basins in North America, where Duvernay is, I guess, the newest one under our belt that we finished probably a month ago. And is also the main objective of this particular call. However, I'll just mention that we've done similar studies in Eagle Ford with multiple companies, Permian with 14 different companies, Scoop Stack, Bakken, and also the Montney the last few years. That's been very, very, very successful. So this particular study, and actually what we try to solve, is that we as engineers or geologists or petrophysicists or marketing or sales people have a lot of these PVT related questions that we need to answer on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes PVT is the only thing that matters. Sometimes PVT properties are one of several things that matters to a particular decision being made or to actually create value add. A few of the problems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is, we need black oil tables for every single well throughout our acreage. How can we get that? Or black oil PVT properties or formation volume factors or solution GORs and whatnot to calculate reserves. Bubble points and dew points been a lot in the media the last few years. How does that actually vary and change across the field? When you're producing oil and gas, you're actually not only selling oil and gas, you're actually selling natural gas, NGLs, and crude. So how can you actually convert these forecasts that you provide in terms of oil and gas rates into the actual products that you sell? How can you quantify separated oil shrinkage, or how can you estimate how much uplift you'll get from gas EOR, in this case, huff and puff? And this is just a few of many questions where essentially the product of this multi-client study is essentially the workhorse, and that will help you answer these things, and we'll get a little bit more back to that later. And the way that we've been conducting this particular study has been to gather all the wells we have found in the public domain in the Duvernay, which is 23 different PVT samples from all the different laboratories that I guess have been conducting these studies. That's Weatherford, or what's now called Stratum, Core Labs, and one more company, I think. And then we've used all that data to create one field-wide so-called equation state model, and we'll talk about what that can be used for and what that really is in a little bit. But the key point is that we can use this one model for all the wells across our basin, and we'll explain a little bit more the details of that in a minute. The alternative to this, and there are alternatives to having a field-wide equation of state, but here's essentially a couple of the key things that is typically flawed with them. So the first thing would be just regular PVT correlations, for instance, the standing correlation or the Glosser correlation or something similar to that. However, technically, they're only yielding reasonable results for solution GORs less than 1,000 scuffs per barrel. And especially when we talk about these Titan conventional systems, probably if we just exclude the Bakken, they span a wide range of fluids. They span the critical, what's called the critical transition, so both near critical gas condensates, near critical volatile oils, and gas condensates, where a lot of these correlations fall short in their predictive capabilities. Another opportunity would be just to create a so-called regular equation of state, which typically is just tuned to one sample or very few samples in a particular basin. And what you typically see there is that they're not capturing the field-wide characteristics, which is, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, the relative paraphenicity or aromaticity of that particular field. And that's really, really important, and essentially what we will also show later for this particular basin and a lot of the other basins as well, where a lot of these fluid systems, especially in Titan conventionals, have a very, very consistent trend when it comes to this so-called relative paraphenicity or aromaticity. But before we go into that, the first thing is to answer, okay, a field-wide equation of state model, what is it really? In short, it's a model that requires 3 input parameters, so pressure and temperature that we know very well from day-to-day work, being in the kitchen. You know that water boils at 100 degrees C. You know that you might have a pressure cooker in the kitchen as well. And with those 2 inputs and this thing that we probably don't have that much of a hands-on relationship to, which is the composition, which is just what differentiates a dry gas from a black oil to a gas condensate. With these 3 inputs, you can then predict the phase and volumetric behavior for a particular fluid. Okay, and so the equation of state, whatever is in this model for the entire field, is kept constant, while what is changing is the temperatures and pressures and the composition from one area to another. And just to take an example, a dry gas would have much more methane content and no C7 plus content, while a black oil, for instance, would have a much lower, on a relative basis, C1 content and more than 25 mole percent C7 plus, for instance. And that's what we call a multi-sample or a common or a so-called field-wide equation of state, where several compositions are used in the same model, and the results for a black oil, a near critical gas condensate, and a volatile oil, as you see to the right here, is predicted with only one model. And the strict definition of this is that each sample is described by the same equation of state, where each sample's unique composition is all that's required to accurately predict PVT data for that specific fluid. And then the question is, what is actually different from one basin to another? And that's essentially what I talked about in the introduction, this relative paraphenicity and aromaticity. And what does that really mean? That means how we actually characterize these heavier components typically heavier than C7 plus, because they are, for practical purposes, just averages actually of all the isomers that exist in, for instance, C15. So C15 can there is potentially close to 1,500 isomers that can make up C15, while the C15 that you're actually characterizing for the Duvernay, for instance, is just an average C15 for the Duvernay, which might be different from the Eagle Ford and the Bakken and the Scoop Stack. Okay, so the biggest difference from one field to another is how we characterize these different heavier components, typically heavier than C7 or C10 plus. Where the heaviest component is what's typically the most radically different from one field to another. And to make this a little bit less abstract and a little bit more concrete, if I asked you, send me an equation of state model, then you would typically send me a file or an Excel sheet or something similar where you have two tables, one being the so-called component properties, and the second being the so-called binary interaction parameters. And they are representing two of the industry standard equations, which is typically Peng-Robinson, and SRK, which is so-called cubic equations of state, that you can use in any of the industry standard commercial tools as of today. And yet again, this equation of state is the cornerstone to so many different engineering applications. And sometimes you are not using the equation of state directly, but you're using derivatives of the equations of state, which is, for instance, black oil tables. And most black oil tables today that you use commercially, they're actually generated from an equation of state, but what you're using as a direct input in the simulation is a black oil table that's kind of like a child or a derived product of that model, which will be specific for one composition to another. So jumping back into the Duvernay fieldwide EOS study, which is what this call is about, we have conducted a so-called fieldwide, or we've made a fieldwide PVT model that everybody that participates in the project gets immediate access to. And that's tuned to actually 23 different PVT reports, so a considerable amount of data, all the data that we found in the public domain. The data itself, the raw data, we share as a part of the GIP, so you get the data, you get the equation of state, and you also, since the work is also done already, you get the results immediately, and which means that essentially you could start to use these things, tomorrow in theory. The available data that we have is 10 reservoir oils and 13 reservoir gases. So we have 10 bubble point samples and 14 dew point samples. And this is just the experimental overview where we have 23 CCE tests, 13 CVD tests, 10 DLE tests, and 9 multi-stage tests, and a lot of also reservoir oil viscosities. And it's for those of you who are in the domain, it's very rare to actually have measured reservoir gas viscosities. Most of the samples are from Weatherford. There is also one from Core Lab, one from Agate, and one from Schlumberger. And then in addition, there's around 33 single-stage flash experiments conducted on 33 separator oils, which is a key point in, for instance, estimating flash factors and shrinkage factors for individual wells and how they change throughout time. The most important thing, and I iterate that over and over again, is when you're developing a field-wide equation of state to actually have a wide range of different fluid samples. And we can definitely see that that's the point in this data set. We have GORs all the way from 500 scuffs per separator barrel up to 50,000, I think. Then the same goes for the saturation pressures. They're monotonically increasing until some maximum before it decreases at higher GORs. This is what you see in the classical textbooks of PVT from, for instance, Standing and whatnot. This is a very, very good basis and a very good starting point to create these field-wide equations of state, because you capture not only the simple call it phase behavior stuff, but you also are covering a lot of the near critical and probably rich gas condensate volatile oil PVT and phase behavior that represents what we call complex PVT and associated phase behavior data. So that's very good. And you see that actually this range right here, where we have most of the data, is actually in that region that represents the most complex phase behavior there is, which is what's called near critical fluids. And if you're able to predict that accurately with an equation of state model, you have a very, very robust equation of state, because that's not trivial. And it also is a very, very good starting point, for instance, if you are going to model gas injection processes as well. This particular trend right here is showing the specific gravity versus molecular weight. And for those of you who haven't seen a plot like that before, what it really represents is a very, very nice field-wide consistent trend of essentially this relative paraphonicity and aromaticity that we see consistently in many fields, including these tight and conventional fields, as this is another example of. And when you have this basis, as you see here, in as a part of your data set, you have at least a very, very good starting point to be able to create a so-called field-wide equation of state that we proved yet again here that was actually possible to develop, and that this equation of state also predicts this wide variety of fluids at different conditions. And we can definitely see here that one of the kind of requirements, this consistent field-wide aromaticity and paraphonicity relationship, was developed for this particular field. And in terms of the predictions, here you see a few examples of some very near critical gas condensates, and you see that by, or at least down here, you see, if you see my cursor, these are fairly near critical, almost a vertical liquid dropout curve right here. While this is something a little bit leaner here, and you see that based on the liquid saturations, but very, very good matches on that, which is a very complex phase behavior when it becomes near critical. We see the same, but this is on the other side of the critical point when we're working with oils and we work with oil shrinkage, that the similar trend can be observed, and very good predictive results on that. The same also goes for the compositions, which is representing the K values, which is also a important piece to capture across the field. And not to mention also the oil viscosities, which is actually probably both the most uncertain thing that you measure in the laboratory, and also probably one of the hardest things to accurately be able to model with an equation of state. And we use the so-called LBC model for that, which is also a part of the deliverables. So the question that many people have is like, okay, we get if we participate in this study, great. We actually get the field-wide equation of state model. We get a report. And we get all the PVT reports that the model was built upon. But how can I actually use this in my day-to-day work? And for all of you that have been working in the industry for a long time, you know that PVT is one of the few things that actually has an impact on essentially every discipline in the petroleum domain, whether you do reservoir, RTA or PTA analysis, pipe flow, process, or reserves. Or actually it could be seismic and drilling simulation and whatnot. It actually has an impact, and sometimes to a lesser degree, and sometimes to a more significant degree. But trust me, like I've been feeling like the guy on the picture here many times, and it has to deal with the fact that you actually utilizing and accessing PVT data can be complex, and especially to do it correctly. And it's not only because you have very, very detailed laboratory reports in all kinds of different formats for all the different in all kinds of different shapes and forms, but actually to convert this into something meaningful that I can put into my models is not always a trivial thing to do. That's also why we I guess in tandem with the study, also provided a 50% discounted version of our software as well, but you can use these results in immediately. And we like to think about our software, which is called the Whitson PVT, as a living document for all PVT data and models inside of a company, which means that everybody in this company has unlimited access to the solution. It's web-based, so you would simply just go into the name of your company.com, and you will get you need to log in with your simple Outlook information, and you have access to all these results. And when we get new and more information, these results will be updated dynamically. It's shared across the organization, which allows for a consistent apples to apples comparison. And it also allows for a place where you actually have a version control of the models that you use into your analysis. And important for us to emphasize here that this is not a tool that's very complex. I'll show it in just a minute, but it's designed for all users in their day-to-day work, and that can be everything from just accessing information volume factors on a particular well, or to generate a black oil table for a particular well. So it's designed for all users in day-to-day work, and not for in-depth studies and advanced users. And the way it looks, you can see on the screen right here. If you also go for the essentially the deliverables to be delivered in the solution, then the first thing is that we'll have all these wells where we have the data database. So for instance, the PVT reports. You get an overview of all the PVT reports in this particular view right here. So they're already databased for you. You see what well was it conducted on, what was the report date, what lab did conduct this experiment, and also what experiments was conducted. If you want to know a little bit more about it, you can of course just expand this view right here, and you can, if you want to download this particular report, you can get an overview of what experiments that was conducted. You can also get some more information about the quality checks that was done. Was it the quality checks moderate or bad, moderate or good when the test or the PVT report QC was done? And if there are any key comments, the key comments will also be provided, or key takeaways from the report itself. The key takeaways are provided in this small box right there. And this allows for a consistent place to store this type of data. You know that this type of data was used to create this particular model right here, and it was created by Bilal, that you can export into all the different formats that you can think of. And it's a so-called Ping-Robinson equation of state with 35 components, with the associated LBC and gamma model, as you see right here. And probably most importantly, this is not only like a place, this is not like a SharePoint folder where you have a file. This is actually hooked up to a thermodynamic engine, such that you can actually start to run calculations on a well-to-well basis. Okay, so if you for instance would like to create a black oil table for your particular well, you can do that on every single well. You can also get the information volume factors and GORs, and you can export it into all the format that really matters: Kappa, Harmony, IMAX, Eclipse, ResFrac, T-Navigator, and so forth. Okay, and the only thing that's really required to actually create a table like this, which is actually a fairly time-consuming thing, depends on the data that you have available. Okay, and everything is now delivered into this system, and you can define or you can create a fluid based on different methods. The simplest one being just that you have API and GOR and the reservoir conditions. And with this limited input, what is actually happening behind the scenes is that we're finding a composition that has actually been measured in the field. And then we recombine this composition to replicate this data at the 1000 GOR, and also modify the molecular weight of the C7 plus component to exactly match the input of API. So we have two input parameters, and we have two regression parameters, which is just a recombination GOR and this molecular weight C7 plus, and we're able to recreate exactly this input data right here. If you want to be fancy, and for a lot of the companies in Canada, they also have separated compositions up to C7 plus that will yield better results, and you also have this type of data for every single well. Or if you have a PVT report for a particular well, you can input the composition from that report directly also into the system. Key takeaway is that no matter what the method you're using, you can generate the black oil table dynamically on the go for every single well with this limited information, and you can also get the associated black oil table and the associated reservoir properties as well in this basic module. Very good. So just with that, I just wanted to communicate that these things can be in theory utilized already tomorrow, and they at least come in a home that or potentially, if you like to do that, where you can provide or obtain value adding type of analysis from day one. The last thing to just mention, there's a few things about participation logistics. The deliverables there are three different deliverables. The first one being the field-wide equation state model itself. There is also a detailed report, and of course all the different PVT reports that was used in the study. We have actually before Christmas, so so before 2021, essentially, there's a 50% discount on the study. Well, after that, it's $30,000. So a small little Christmas gift from all of us. If you want to go for the associated software solution as well, that's also provided on a discounted basis for Duvernay, which will be just $5,000 per year. So on that note, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to go through. And on this note, I'll see if there's any questions. If not, we'll also send out all the material over email a little bit later today as well. Okay, so I think on that we can just did you get any questions then, Mo? Okay, let's see here. Is there? I think we got a question here. Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So we got a question. Do you want me to go through that just quick?
Yeah, is that the question from Amit?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the question is, can we talk about any differences between developing field-wide equations of state for conventionals versus unconventional reservoirs, and also about fluid initialization? So I think the first question is the first thing being, is there any difference between how we would develop equations of state, multi-sample equations of state for conventionals versus unconventionals? There's a few key things. The overall workflow and the process, a lot of the QCs and whatnot are identical for all practical purposes. There are a few things in unconventionals that we're not dealing with. For instance, mud contamination. That's a non-issue in unconventionals. So we're a little bit lucky there. That simplifies our life there. And the other thing is that all the field-wide equations of state that you develop for unconventionals, you just have so much more data. So typically when you develop, maybe you have 10 samples for a field or 20, while in unconventionals you have 50, 70, 100. Like in the Permian we had, I think, 135 different reservoir fluid compositions. So it's from those perspectives, it's more related to the magnitude of it, and therefore it also takes much time. What's been interesting about conducting all these different studies for all these different fields is that we've seen there be some similarities across the fields. All of them are fairly light fluids. The so-called Whitson characterization factor, or this relative paraphenicity aromaticity relationship, is it's not the same in the different fields, and they change a little bit, but they're a little bit in the same order of magnitude. They're around 12 plus minus maybe 0.5 when it comes to the Whitson characterization factor, which is telling us that it's a lot of consistency in the data and across these different fields in general. So that's on the actual development, but the work that we do is like when you're developing a field-wide equation of state, you are trying to replicate the experiments in the laboratory and compositions that you have in the PVT cell in the laboratory. And in that sense, it's just one composition, as it would be in conventionals. Is just a few different issues that you don't have to deal with. The other thing is that in conventional reservoirs, you typically have much more bottom-hole samples, and also probably even more what's called MDT samples or open-hole formation testing samples, which you don't have any of in unconventional reservoirs because of the low perm. You have a few bottom-hole samples, but that's that we didn't have, I think, in this case. And most of the samples are also surface or recombined surface sample, which is totally fine as well. But that's just one other difference. So I think we listed 3 different things there. But it's more related to what data you have available than necessarily the workflow itself. The fluid incisation question is very, very interesting, actually. And in conventional reservoirs, you have much more spatial data. Typically, the companies take probably, since the reservoirs are larger, the budgets are also larger per well. At least you're able to justify paying more for spatial data. I'm thinking MDT samples and multiple wells and different benches and different reservoir blocks and whatnot. While in conventional reservoirs, you don't have that. So typically when you are doing fluid incisation in an unconventional reservoir, you're assuming a constant composition in incisation, versus in a conventional reservoir, you would typically, or sometimes at least, go for a compositional gradient that's driven by gravity, for instance, which is not the case in unconventionals, where you actually see the opposite of what you would see in conventionals, where the deeper stuff is actually gas, the shallower stuff is more oily. So it's flipped the other way around. So what we've been looking at a lot recent years with Curtis and a few others here, and also that he has been advising through different PhDs at the university, has been essentially fluid heterogeneity in unconventionals, so that you have different layers with different in situ GOR and potentially totally different fluids, actually. That's something that we've seen in, for instance, the Montney, where there have been a lot of studies and papers and also scientific, I guess, measurements that suggest that there are higher perm streaks with more with a lighter fluid, so essentially a gas, while you have other layers with an oil, so you can initialize them, the different layers with different composition or different GORs, and those layers would not be in equilibrium as you would have in a classical conventional reservoirs necessarily. So that's the difference there. And I would say fluid initialization conventionals is not only difficult because of the lack of data, but it's also difficult because you're you have these different wells that are 2 mile long, and they have a gazillion different clusters these days. And the fracs are also the surface area generated by the different completions can be very large. So you're actually draining a very, very large portion, while what you're producing at surface is just a volume weighted average of everything and all the different compositions that you're draining subsurface. And that's also why that, combined with lack of very accurate measurement tools, gives you this uncertainty on your initial GORs, for instance, which is one of the key input parameters to do fluid initialization, for instance. So yeah, that's a couple of the differences there in terms of the equational state development and also the fluid initialization part specifically. Yeah, very good. And a few other questions we can just follow up with over email. I think we'll send out the recording of this over email, and also the slide deck itself for those of you who are interested in that. And as a last note, I'll just have to wish everybody a happy end of the year. We're soon in 2021, and hope that everybody stays safe and healthy in these strange times. It's important that we all take good care of each other, and then hopefully we'll see each other maybe in person next year. That would be great, at some conference when we have a vaccine in place, and hopefully we're in better shape, all of us. So on that note, I'll just thank everybody for showing up, and we'll just stay in touch with all of you. Thanks.